Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Our lecture today is about the thorax, and here we give you the part 1 of the lecture. Introduction. The thorax is located in the upper trunk between the neck and the abdomen. It includes the thoracic cavity and the thoracic wall. The thoracic cavity is separated from the abdominal cavity، يعني التجويف الصدري ينفصل عن التجويف البطني abdominal cavity by a muscular structure which is called the diaphragm، الحجاب الحاجز. The thoracic cavity contains the main organs of respiration، that say a pair of lungs الرئتين and organ of circulation which is the heart. The thorax is supported by osteocartilaginous elastic framework which is called the thoracic cage القفص الصدري, and this thoracic cage is designed for increasing and decreasing intrathoracic pressure, a process which occurs during inspiration الشهيق and expiration الزفير to a process of breathing. Here we have these two pictures showing the thoracic cage القفص الصدري. This is an anterior view of the thoracic cage, and this is a posterior view of the thoracic cage, showing the components of this thoracic cage. Here we have the sternum عظم القص and the 12 pairs of ribs الأضلاع, and posteriorly we have the thoracic vertebrae starting from T1, let's say thoracic vertebrae number 1 to T12 thoracic vertebrae number 12. So these three parts or three type of bones will form the thoracic cage شكل لنا القفص الصدري. Of course here you have the clavicle, عظم الترقوة. This is the clavicle, also articulate with the sternum here in this area. This is called the clavicular notch on both sides, of course. And of course this is the scapula. Scapula with the clavicle forming the shoulder girdle حزام الكتف. Now, what are these bones that form the thoracic cage? We have the sternum. This is the sternum. We have the 12 pairs of ribs from 1 to 12 on each side, and we have the thoracic vertebrae, which is 12 thoracic vertebrae. Now we talk about these three parts of the thoracic cage, and we discuss each one in a short notes. Starting with the sternum, what are the parts and the vertebral level of each part of the sternum? The sternum composed of three parts, and these three parts are, first of all, we have the manubrium sterni, and this manubrium sterni is in front or behind. It is the thoracic vertebrae, the second to the fourth thoracic vertebrae. Second part of the sternum is the body, جسم الsternum, and behind this body we have the fifth thoracic vertebrae to the eighth thoracic vertebrae. And the last part or the third part of the sternum is the xiphoid process, and this is the ninth thoracic vertebrae. The sternum, in addition to these three parts, it has certain features, and these features include, first of all, it has a notch which is called a suprasternal notch at the upper part or the upper border of the mandibular sterni, we have a notch just like حفرة صغيرة, which is also called jugular notch. The second feature is the sternal ankle, زاوية عظم القص, وتسمى ويطلق عليها the ankle of Lewis. So these are the three parts of the sternum. First of all, this is the mandibular sterni, and second, we have the body of the sternum. This is the body of the sternum, and the third part is the xiphoid process. And here we have this notch, just like حفرة صغيرة at the upper border or at the upper part of the mandibular sterni, and this notch is called suprasternal notch. Supra يعني فوق, suprasternal notch. And here we have another notch in the mandibular sterni, which is called clavicular notch. Why? Because the clavicle will articulate with the sternum at this notch. Clavicular notch goes on the side. And here we have another notch which is called costal notches. Are many notches? Second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seven. All these notches are called costal notches, where the ribs or the cartilaginous part of the rib articulate تتمفصل with the body of the and part of the xilosternum. Between these parts of the sternum, we have two main joints, which are fixed joints, immobile. First of all, we have the joint which is called mandibulosternal joint. I'll say a joint, this joint between the mandibular sterni and the body of the sternum. And between or at this joint, we have the ankle, which is called the sternal ankle. If we look, this is an anterior view. If you look a lateral view to the sternum, we see there is an ankle here between the mandibular sterni and the body, and this ankle is called sternal ankle. Actually, this is an important landmark for many structures within the thoracic cavity at this level. For example, the trachea, القصبة الهوائية, when it enters the thoracic cavity, it bifurcates into right and left main bronchus at this level. Also, the arch of aorta at this level, and other structures related to this ankle of Lewis or sternal ankle. The other joint is the sterno or the xipho-sternal joint. Xipho-sternal joint between the body and the xiphoid process here. Other joints is sternoclavicular joint. Here at this notch we have the sternoclavicular joint, that's say between the clavicle and the sternum. And lastly, we have the sternocostal joints between the ribs and the body of the sternum. And here we have 7 costal notches. Only 7 ribs articulate with the body or with the sternum. The other ribs are, we will talk about it in the, when we talk about the ribs, we will see that the other ribs where how it articulates with the sternum indirectly, and the other or the last 2 ribs that didn't reach the sternum, and they are called floating ribs. So the ribs, they are 12 pairs of ribs, 12 ribs on each side of the body or the thoracic cage. And they are bony arcs عبارة عن أقواس عظمية. الضلع عبارة عن أقواس عظمية placed obliquely وموضوعة بشكل مائل and arranged one below the other. كل ضلع يكون تحت ضلع آخر. This is the first, this is the second, this is the third, the fourth, the fifth, and so on. Between each ribs and the other, we have a gaps, spaces. This gaps or spaces is called intercostal space. Intercostal space. And of course, these spaces are filled with muscles, which is called the intercostal muscles. The intercostal muscles. And these spaces are 11 in number. Why? Because the last rib, 12th rib, below it there is no rib, of course, this is the last one. So the space below it is called subcostal space. So, but the intercostal space are 11. The first 7 ribs, أول 7 أضلاع connected anteriorly to lateral side of sternum through their costal cartilage, which is called true ribs or vertebrosternal ribs. So the types of ribs, we have 3 types of ribs or 2 types. We have the true ribs and the false ribs. The first 7 are called true ribs because it has an attachment between the thoracic vertebra and the body of the sternum. And the sternum, of course, the first with the mandibular sterni and the others with the body of the sternum. So because they have an attachment between the vertebra and the sternum, they are called true ribs, الأضلاع الحقيقية. وعددها 7 ribs, 7 on each side. And also it's called vertebrosternal ribs. The rest 5 ribs are called false ribs, الأضلاع الكاذبة, of which من هاي الخمس أضلاع الكاذبة the 8th, the 9th and 10th joined to each other. You see here, this is the 10th rib and this is the 9th rib and this is the 8th rib. These ribs, its cartilaginous part, of course this blue color is a cartilaginous part of the ribs, chondral part of the rib. So the 10th, the 9th and 8th, these 3 ribs are attached together here and then they attach with the cartilage of the 7th rib. So they didn't reach the sternum. So because they didn't reach the sternum, they are called false ribs, الأضلاع الكاذبة. And so it is called vertebrochondral ribs. Chondral, what's meant by chondral? Chondral means cartilage. Chondral is a medical, in the medical terminology, the chondrum is a cartilage, so it is a vertebrochondral ribs. They didn't reach the sternum like the true ribs. The true ribs, vertebrosternal, because it reached the sternum. The false ribs, they didn't reach the sternum directly, but their cartilage unite or join together, the 9th, 10th, and 8th, 9th, and 10th, and they attach to the cartilaginous part of the 7th rib, and so they are called vertebrochondral ribs. The anterior end of the 11th and 8th, the 12th ribs are free, and so they are called floating ribs. You see here, this is the 11th rib, and this is the 12th rib. Their ends, you see, this is the end of the 8th rib, and this is the ends of the 12th rib. These ribs, they didn't reach the sternum or the cartilage, they are free. Their ends are free, so they are called floating ribs أو ما يطلق عليها الأضلاع السائبة. الأضلاع السائبة مع الأضلاع الكاذبة مع الأضلاع الثامن والتاسع والعاشر, all of these are called false ribs, الأضلاع الكاذبة. So the false ribs include these 8th, 9th, and 10th that attach their cartilaginous part attached together with the cartilage of the 7th, and the 11th and 12th rib, their anterior end, it didn't reach the sternum or also it has no cartilaginous part, so they are called floating ribs الأضلاع السائبة اللي هم ضلعين الحادي عشر والثاني عشر. The first two and last three ribs, the first two and last three ribs has special features, and they are called atypical ribs. The rest from the third to the ninth rib are typical ribs. They have the same anatomical structure, and so they are called typical ribs. The parts of the rib. This rib هذا الضلع يتكون من عدة أجزاء. We have two ends, anterior end, which is called costal cartilage. This is the costal cartilage, and this is the sternal end because it attached to the sternum. It has a head which is posteriorly. This is the head which located posteriorly, and this is called vertebral because it articulates with the thoracic vertebrae. And this head has two facets, سطحين, upper small and lower large. This is upper facet for articulation, and this is lower. Of course, this will articulate with the unarticular facets in the thoracic vertebra here, and also this facets also articulate with the thoracic with another facets in the thoracic vertebra. So it has two facets that articulate with the thoracic vertebra. So all this is called the head, and also it has a neck, عنق. This is important, also part of the rib, which is called the neck, and also here it has a small bony projection, فدنته عظمي, which is called the tubercle. Now it's called tubercle, would give an attachment to muscles and so on. And also it has the shaft, and this is all this part is called the shaft of the rib, and in its lower part or in the lower edge, lower border of this shaft, we have the groove which is called costal groove. Costal الخدود الضلعي. Costal means related to the rib. The costal groove, this is here, this is very important, costal groove, in which the neurovascular bundle is present that supply the thoracic wall. Now the third part of the thoracic cage is the thoracic vertebrae, and as we said, it is 12 vertebrae, and its parts are the body. This is the body of the vertebra, and it contains also 7 processes. This process, transverse process, and so on, and the spine of the vertebra, and the second to the 8th thoracic vertebrae are typical vertebrae. They have the same features from the 2nd to the 8th thoracic vertebrae, carry the same features, the same anatomical features, so they are called typical vertebrae. The first and last 4 are atypical vertebrae. They are different from the 2nd to the 8th. So because it is different, they are called atypical. So what are the atypicals? The atypicals thoracic vertebrae are the first and the last 4 thoracic vertebrae. And here, of course, you see all these parts of the vertebrae, the body, the superior costal facets for head of the rib, and the inferior costal facet for head of the rib. Of course, this is for the rib, the upper lip, and here the facet for the ribs, which is below the, uh, the other lip. Let's say that each vertebrae give attachment articulation with two ribs, one above, one below. Of course, these facets are for articulation of the vertebrae between the upper and the lower vertebrae. I say yes, articulation between the vertebrae. This superior articular process of the on facet would articulate with the inferior articular process of the vertebrae that is above this vertebra. Here another picture showing all these. This is the body. This is the vertebral foramen through which the spinal cord pass, and of course all these facets are for articulation between the vertebrae above and vertebrae below. Vertebra below and vertebra above and vertebra below. And this is of course the spine or the spinal process of the vertebra. Now, what are the muscles of the thoracic cage? As we said previously, we said that there is between each rib and the rib below it, we have a gap, and this gap is called intercostal space. So the muscles or these gaps are filled with these muscles. What are these muscles? Actually, we have five muscles that make up the thoracic cage. And these five muscles are the intercostal muscles, which are three muscles. One is external, the second is the internal العضلة الخارجية، بعدين العضلة الداخلية internal, and innermost more medially muscle. So from outside we have the external, intercostal, and then to the inner, we go to the inner, we go inside toward the inside of the thoracic cavity. We have another muscle which is called internal, intercostal, and another muscle which is called innermost intercostal muscles. Another muscles, also these are three muscles, and all of these are intercostal muscles. Also, there are another muscles which is called subcostalis muscle. I will show you in the picture later on in the next slide, which is called subcostalis muscle, and the fifth muscle is the transversus thoracis muscle. So these are three or five muscles that form the thoracic wall. Of course, from outside to inside, we have the skin, subcutaneous tissue, fascia, subcutaneous tissue, and then comes the intercostal muscles, and then we have the subcostalis muscle and transversus thoracis. So these are the five muscles that form the thoracic wall. These muscles act to change the volume of the thoracic cavity during respiration. The direction of the fibers of these muscles, the external, internal, and innermost, is different, not in the same direction. Because of this two directions of the muscles, when it contracts, it will change the thoracic cavity during respiration. I will show you in the next slide this point. There are some muscles that do not comprise the thoracic wall. يعني الثوراسيك وول اللي ذكرناهم الخمس عضلات هم اللي يشكلون لنا thoracic wall. لكن إضافة لهذه الخمس عضلات عندنا another muscles, they are attached to the thoracic wall but are not related to the thoracic wall, not are part of the thoracic wall, but it takes attachments to the sternum, to the costal margin, but it is related to the upper extremity, to the upper limb, الأطراف العليا. And this picture will show you these muscles. First of all, here we have, this is the external intercostal muscle. Of course, this is a rib, and this is another rib, and this is a gap between the ribs. So this gaps, or this space is called intercostal space, is filled with these muscles. First of all, from outside, we have the external intercostal muscle. You see its fibers run in this way from the lower rib to the upper rib. And second, we have the internal intercostal muscle, also between this rib and the rib above. And also you see the direction of their fibers is direction different from the direction of the fibers of the external intercostal. And here we have the innermost, also direction of fibers is vertical. This innermost العضلة الداخلية اللي تكون للداخل باتجاه التجويف الصدري. هاي العضلة الثالثة من intercostal muscles. So when these muscles contract, well, imagine the contraction of these muscles. When this muscle contracts, this will be shortened and this will be shortened, so the space will be increased. When contraction of this muscle, the space will increase. And when it increases, of course, we have in breathing, we have the inspiration and expiration. We have الشهيق والزفير. In case of inspiration, الشهيق, this gap will increase, and the obliquity of the ribs, as we said, is an oblique. It will become more horizontal. When it becomes more horizontal, the space will increase between the two ribs, and this will end with that increase in the volume, is that حجم الانتراتhoracic cavity, and so the pressure will be decreased, and so air will enter the lungs during inspiration, and the opposite thing will happen during expiration, and so the air will go out the lung. Here also طبعا of course this part مكبر هنا بهالحجم حتى تشوفون ترتيب العضلات اللي موجودة ما بين الأضلاع intercostal muscles. Here is divided, other muscle which is divided, which is called the pectoralis major, العضلة الصدرية الكبرى, and we'll see it. And also of course this is another muscle which is the serratus anterior. You see, there are some other muscles that do not comprise the thoracic wall but do attach to it, and these muscles includes, we have the pectoralis major العضلة الصدرية الكبرى, and minor العضلة الصدرية الصغرى, serratus anterior العضلة المخططة الأمامية, and scalene muscle. So these four muscles are attached to the thoracic cage, but they are not part of the muscles of the thoracic cage. The pectoralis major, minor, serratus anterior, and the scalene muscle. And see, actually this is the from the inside of the thoracic cavity. You see, this is the thoracic vertebrae, and these are the ribs. Here you see these muscles that pass from ribs to ribs posteriorly. This muscle is called subcostalis muscle. These are the subcostalis muscles, of course, on both sides, from the inner aspects of the thoracic cage. These muscles also assist the process of respiration by its contraction and relaxation. And here we have, this view is the anterior, from inside, of course, the thoracic cavity, but it is anterior. We have the sternum. Here we have the sternum from the inside. This is the inside of the sternum. And here are the ribs, and these are the intercostal space. Here from the sternum to the ribs, we have a muscle which is called transverse thoracis. These muscles, transverse thoracis. So these also help or assist the process of respiration during inspiration and expiration. Of course, here we have the artery. Keep this artery in your mind. We'll talk about it at the end of our lecture. This artery is called the long thoracic, the internal thoracic artery. Internal thoracic artery and internal thoracic vein. This supply these muscles and supply the intercostal space and its contents. And this internal thoracic artery is a branch from the first part of the subclavian artery. This is the subclavian artery. This is the subclavian artery. If you remember, we said that from the first part of subclavian artery, we have here an artery which goes to the up ascends in the neck, which is called the vertebral artery. So the first part of the subclavian artery will give the vertebral artery goes to the neck, and here another artery which is the internal thoracic artery which descends in the inner surface or aspects of the anterior thoracic wall, and it gives a branch to the muscles of the intercostal muscles and the bones of the ribs and the sternum from inside. Here, the muscles that are attached to the thoracic cage, but it is not part of the thoracic cage, muscle of the thoracic cage. We have this pectoralis major. It is related, this muscle related to the upper limb, pectoralis major, عضلة صدرية كبرى. And if you remove this muscle, we have here attached to the ribs, to the third, second, fourth, and fifth ribs, we have this muscle which is called pectoralis minor, العضلة الصدرية الصغرى. This is pectoralis major, عضلة صدرية أو صدرية الكبرى، وتحت مباشرة عندنا the pectoralis minor. And of course, this is the serratus anterior. العضلة أيضا تسمى serratus anterior. Okay. Now we talk about the blood supply of the thoracic wall. Blood supply of the thoracic wall. The blood supply comes from many arteries. First of all, we have the internal thoracic artery. And as I said, this is the internal thoracic artery. You see, as we said, this is from the inner aspects of the anterior thoracic wall, and this is the posterior aspect of the sternum. You see, just beside the sternum, it comes from the first internal thoracic artery, from the first part of subclavian artery, and descend in the thoracic cavity, and it gives a branch to each intercostal space, supplying the muscles of the intercostal muscles. Here you see all these branches are from the internal thoracic artery. So the internal thoracic artery, it supplies the anterior wall of the body, of the chest, from the clavicle to the umbilicus. يبدأ توزيع البرانش of this artery from the clavicle من عظم الترقوة to the level of the umbilicus, يعني even the upper part of the abdomen is supplied by this internal thoracic artery. It is a branch of the first part of subclavian artery in the neck. It descends vertically on the pleura. The pleura هو غشاء الجنب الذي يحيط بالرئة. راح نتكلم عنه إن شاء الله في المحاضرة القادمة. layers of pleura أو البلورا layers عندنا visceral والparietal and so on. So the internal thoracic artery descends vertically on the pleura of the lung behind خلف the costal cartilage. A finger breadth بعرض صباعه lateral to the sternum and ends in the fifth intercostal space. ينتهي internal thoracic artery at the level of the fifth intercostal space by dividing into two branches, which are the superior epigastric artery and musculophrenic arteries. Superior epigastric artery and musculophrenic arteries. Phrenic, of course, you know, it means the diaphragm. يعني branch اللي يغذي لنا العضلات ويغذي لنا الdiaphragm. This artery, internal thoracic artery, it gives the anterior intercostal arteries. Two small arteries in each of the 9 spaces. يعني أول 9 spaces راح كل space يجيها 2 branches, small arteries, two branches from the anterior intercostal arteries. Sorry, from the internal thoracic artery. The upper 6 from the internal thoracic. The upper 6 anterior intercostal arteries come from the internal thoracic artery. And the lower 3 from the musculophrenic arteries. You see? احنا ذكرنا بأنه الانترنال thoracic artery ينتهي بالfifth intercostal space by dividing into 2 branches. So before it is divided into its 2 terminal branch, which is superior epigastric and musculophrenic arteries. Before it is divided to this terminal branch, it gives anterior intercostal arteries. And these are, as we said, it is 2 small arteries in each of the 9 spaces. Of course, the first 6 of the from the internal thoracic, also this internal thoracic artery, also it is called internal mammary because it supplies the breast area. So it is also called one of the main blood supply of the breast. So it's also called internal mammary artery. But the lower 3 anterior intercostal arteries come from one of the terminal branches of the internal thoracic artery اللي هو musculophrenic artery. The second source of blood supply to the thoracic cage is the costocervical trunk. Costocervical trunk, this trunk comes from the second part of the subclavian artery. So the second part of the subclavian artery will give us costocervical trunk, that it gives the superior intercostal artery. And this superior intercostal artery will give blood supply to the first and second intercostal spaces. See? Even the first and second intercostal spaces are supplied by the superior intercostal artery. And this superior intercostal artery is a branch from costocervical trunk, which is a branch from the second part of subclavian artery. The third blood supply to the thoracic cage is the descending thoracic aorta. You know, the aorta has many parts. If you remember in the previous lectures, we said that the aorta has an ascending part, then arch of aorta, and then descending part. And the descending part, of course, ينقسم قسمين, thoracic aorta and then abdominal aorta. So the descending thoracic aorta will give the lower 9 posterior intercostal arteries. You know the position of the aorta in the posterior part of the thoracic cavity, slides posteriorly. So it gives 9 posterior intercostal arteries and the subcostal artery. So it gives 9 actually branches, the descending thoracic artery. It gives 10 branches, 9 posterior intercostal and 1 subcostal artery, which is below the 12th rib. In each space, the posterior intercostal artery and its collateral branch, it has collateral branch, يعني branch مصاحب له, anastomose with the two anterior intercostal arteries. There is anastomosis between the anterior and posterior intercostal arteries. And you know, the anterior intercostal arteries are from the internal thoracic artery, which is a branch from the first part of the subclavian artery. And the posterior intercostal arteries are branched from the aorta, from the descending thoracic aorta. So these anterior and posterior intercostal arteries, they anastomose with each other. There are 3 anastomoses between the anterior and posterior intercostal arteries. So this picture shows you these muscles and where these vessels present. Of course, this is the skin, this is the superficial fascia, and here is the rib, and here is the external intercostal muscle. This is the internal intercostal muscle, and this is the innermost intercostal muscle. And of course, you see this groove, which is called costal groove. At the lower end of each rib, as we said, there is a groove, and this groove will have or will give a space for the neurovascular bundle. And these vessels and nerves are arranged in this manner in all intercostal spaces, like here and here and so on. Starting above is the intercostal vein, and below the intercostal vein we have the intercostal artery, and below the intercostal artery we have the intercostal nerve. So this neurovascular bundle, الحزمة العصبية أوعية، يعني أوعية دموية مع الشريان مع العصب على شكل بندل، تكون موجودة وين؟ بالكوستال جروف هير، وتكون مرتبة بهالشكل، الفين إلى الأعلى، وتحت الفين عندنا الارتري، وتحت الارتري عندنا النيرف. حتى لا ننساها نكتبها فان، V-A-N, van. The vein up above, below is the artery, and below the artery is the nerve. All of them are intercostal between the ribs. Yes. The veins of the thoracic wall. We have the anterior and posterior intercostal veins. As you know, all the veins, most of the veins, they take their names from the names of the arteries. As we said, we have anterior and posterior intercostal arteries, so we have anterior and posterior intercostal veins. The anterior intercostal veins drain into internal thoracic and musculophrenic veins. You see? The posterior intercostal veins drain backward into the azygos vein on the right side and hemiazygos vein on the left side. These veins, azygos vein on the right and hemiazygos on the left, they collect blood from the abdomen and lower part of the abdomen, and they ascend and unite with each other. All the tributaries unite to form these main veins, which is called the azygos on the right side and the hemiazygos on the left side. I will show you in the next picture. The azygos drains into the superior vena cava. The superior vena cava, you know, the superior vena cava, which is formed by the union of the right and left brachiocephalic vein. The right and left brachiocephalic vein unite to form the superior vena cava, which will enter the right ventricle of the heart. يدخل البطين الأيمن من الheart. So the azygos, which is in the right side, will the drain from the azygos vein will drain to the superior vena cava, and the hemiazygos on the left side will drain into the azygos vein. So all the venous drainage from the right and left of the thoracic wall will be drained to the superior vena cava. You see, this is the azygos on the right side, and here is hemiazygos on the left side. All these drains from the intercostal, from the thoracic wall, will be drained from the left side to the right side to the azygos, and here the azygos will drain into the superior vena cava. This is the superior vena cava. Of course, here we have the heart, which is removed. This is here the site of the heart. This is the inferior vena cava, and this is the superior vena cava, and we have here the heart is removed, and you see here the azygos vein, and all these intercostal veins, posterior intercostal veins, will drain into this azygos vein. And of course, this is the left brachiocephalic vein, and this is the right brachiocephalic vein. They unite to form the superior vena cava, into which the azygos vein will drain. And here in the left side, in the hemiazygos, actually you have an accessory hemiazygos vein that drains the upper intercostal spaces separately, but also it drains into the azygos vein. And here the main hemiazygos vein will drain also into the azygos. All of the blood that drained from the posterior part of the thoracic cage will be drained to the azygos and then to the superior vena cava. Here's another picture. Of course, this is the esophagus. This is the esophagus. You see, هذا المريء. عندنا this area is the left, or this is the right brachiocephalic vein, and this is the left brachiocephalic vein. They unite to form the superior vena cava. هذا في superior vena cava. Of course, this is the heart removed. And you see, this is the azygos on the right side. This is on the right side, sorry. And in the left side, you have the hemiazygos, and all of them here. At this point, you see behind the esophagus, the azygos will communicate. So it is communication of azygos and hemiazygos veins. Here behind the esophagus, the hemiazygos will unite with the azygos vein. Now, what is the nerve supply of the thoracic wall? The nerve supply, it is through the intercostal nerves. And these intercostal nerves are the anterior rami of the first 11 thoracic spinal nerves. Remember, when we talk about the spinal nerves, we said that it arises at two roots, posterior and anterior, ventral, dorsal and ventral root. So from the ventral root, we have the anterior rami of the first 11 thoracic spinal nerves that pass between the ribs, and they are called the intercostal nerves, supplying all the muscles of the thoracic wall. Each intercostal nerve enters an intercostal space between the parietal pleura of the lung الطبقة الخارجية what is called the parietal pleura أو البلورا الطبقة الجدارية of the lung because the lung the next lecture will talk about the pleura. The pleura has two layers, the parietal layer which line the inner surface of the thoracic cavity, and the visceral pleura which is in contact or into close relation or it is surrounding the lung tissue itself, the lung itself. So the intercostal nerve enters the intercostal space between the parietal الطبقة الخارجية of the lung, parietal pleura of the lung, and the posterior intercostal membranes. Posterior intercostal membrane, we have a membrane that cover the intercostal spaces, which is called posterior intercostal membrane. So this intercostal nerves pass between the parietal pleura and the posterior intercostal membrane, and then it runs forward inferiorly to the intercostal vessels in the subcostal groove or costal groove, subcostal groove of the corresponding rib between the innermost and internal intercostal muscles. So the size of this neurovascular bundle which lie in the subcostal groove is between two muscles. This is important point. It's between the innermost and the internal intercostal muscle. You see in this picture? Yes. This neurovascular bundle, intercostal nerve, intercostal artery and vein, they run in the subcostal groove here and in between two muscles, the internal intercostal muscle and the innermost intercostal muscle. It's very clear here in this picture. Yes, also here you see this is the transverse section showing this vertebral, this is the thoracic vertebrae, and here we have the spinal cord, vertebral foramen, giving the dorsal root and ventral root, and from the ventral root we have the intercostal nerve from this ventral rami. You see it passes within the space within the subcostal groove here. Of course this is the aorta, and here the aorta will give also the intercostal artery. You see the intercostal artery قلنا the 9 intercostal space the posterior intercostal arteries are came from the aorta. Yes, here also we have the internal thoracic artery, which is a branch of the first part of the subclavian artery that gives two branches, anterior intercostal arteries. And you see the anastomosis between the anterior intercostal arteries with the posterior intercostal arteries. Here we have anastomosis يتحدون مع بعض يسوون مثل يعني both of them when supplying all the muscles of the intercostal muscles or the wall of the thoracic wall. Okay. Now lastly we'll talk about the lymphatic drainage of the chest wall. We have 3 groups of lymph nodes that drain the thoracic or the chest wall. First of all, we have the sternal or parasternal, or also it's called internal thoracic lymph nodes. They are within the thoracic cavity, and because it lies along the internal thoracic artery, they are called internal thoracic lymph nodes. So they are placed along the internal thoracic artery and they receive lymph from the medial portion of the breast. Actually, this is very important in case of disease of the breast like malignancy of the breast, CA breast, سرطان الثدي. عندنا انتقال الخلايا السرطانية ممكن تنتقل إلى internal thoracic lymph nodes because this lymph nodes drain this part or the medial part of the breast, and also it drains the intercostal spaces and also it drains the diaphragm, حجاب الحاجز. So this is the first group, sternal or parasternal or internal thoracic lymph nodes. The second group of lymph nodes are the internal or the intercostal lymph nodes. The intercostal lymph nodes. This lies near the heads of the ribs and receive lymph from intercostal spaces and pleura, نوشيط الرئة, and drain this lymph nodes drain into the cisterna chyli or to the thoracic duct. Cisterna chyli is a small dilatation in the lower part of the thoracic duct. It's related to the thoracic duct. You know thoracic duct? At the beginning of the thoracic duct or in the lower part of the thoracic duct there is a small dilatation, sac-like structure which is called cisterna chyli. So these intercostal lymph nodes drain their lymphs to the cisterna chyli and the thoracic duct. Here you see this group of lymph nodes, actually many group of lymph nodes in the head and in the neck and in the axilla and so on. But we have here these lymph nodes are related to the, of course this is from the inside of the thoracic cavity. Here we have the internal thoracic lymph nodes. Here, you see. Of course, the intercostal lymph nodes not clear here, but just I want to show you this picture to show you the cisterna chyli or cisterna chyli. This is a dilatation of the thoracic duct. This is the thoracic duct. You see, this is the thoracic duct, and of course, this thoracic duct will ascend to open at the junction of the internal jugular vein with the subclavian vein. This is the thoracic duct. You see, if you remember in the previous lecture, we talk about thoracic duct. Here, at the junction of the internal jugular vein with the subclavian vein, at the junction, the thoracic duct will open. So all the lymph nodes from the intercostal lymph nodes, they will drain into the thoracic duct. And of course, here the lower part of the lymphatic vessels also may drain to the cisterna chyli. The third group is called the diaphragmatic or phrenic lymph nodes. Phrenic means diaphragm, حجاب الحاجز, lymph nodes. This group of lymph nodes lie on the thoracic surface of the diaphragm and liver, and they receive lymph from the pericardium, الغشاء المحيط في القلب, pericardium, غشاء شغاف القلب, يسموه شغاف القلب, diaphragm, حجاب الحاجز, and liver. And these diaphragmatic phrenic lymph nodes drain into the sternal and posterior mediastinal nodes. So they drain into the sternal and posterior mediastinal nodes. When we talk about the mediastinum and we talk about the lymph nodes of the mediastinum, I will show you where these nodes are present, lymph nodes. So a summary of this lymphatic drainage of the thoracic wall. We have first of all the sternal or parasternal, which is not present here in this picture. Second, we have the intercostal lymph nodes. Here we have the intercostal lymph nodes, you see. This is the intercostal lymph nodes. All these are intercostal lymph nodes. and diaphragmatic or phrenic lymph nodes. And this is diaphragm. This is the diaphragm. Diaphragmatic on the surface, the thoracic surface of the diaphragm. You see these lymph nodes, all these nodes. These lymph nodes also will drain into the sternal group and posterior mediastinal lymph nodes. Thank you very much for listening.